So our first project that we're going to make is freestanding lace. We're going to make the little bow. So remember, freestanding lace, the acronym is FSL. So I have a piece here of aqua mesh, and the way to tell that it's aqua mesh is that you wet one end, and if it dissolves, it's aqua mesh. As you can see, I've tried that on this. Now, hooping can be a challenge for some customers who own the Brother embroidering machine, and I'm going to show you a couple of tips that will help you. Number one, have your embroidery hoop flat on a table. Do not hold it up in the air, and you always need to stand to do this because you want to have this flat. Put your stabilizer over top the bottom of the hoop, and that's usually the one that has the thumb screw on it and the one that screws or snaps into the arm of the machine. Put our stabilizer over top. Just loosely put it over top. This is the top of our frame. Now, when we take a look at the frame, there's a backside or underside, and then there's the top side here. Now, the way to tell the top side is that you have notches here. And what it'll do, it'll intersect your hoop perfectly in the middle. So let's put this here. I'm going to slide it in, and you're just going to gently tug your stabilizer so you don't have big wrinkles in it. Now my thumb screw is completely loosened in the bottom. So I'm just going to go around and gently tug. I find that most people, the biggest mistake they make is they make it drum tight. So I have a little pleat here, but since this is aqua mesh and will dissolve in water, it's not going to make a difference. So there I have it in. Now I'm going to tighten it up. So I'll make it tight. I don't want it drum tight. And if you do go too tight, just take a quarter turn and loosen it. Now, Brother makes an amazing little screwdriver that fits over the top here. So if you have issues with your fingers like I do, get a nice big thing to turn it down. So our hoop is now ready to be put into the machine. So let's go over to our machine. Now this has two little insert points on here that'll go on to these little knobs here. Slide it on till you hear it snap in. Snap, there we go. Okay, so let's load up our first design. So let's load up our freestanding lace design, and it is on my USB stick. So I'm going to press the icon, the universal icon for USB. Let's go to Brother, and we can see the very first design here is the lace bow. I'm going to press it, set it. Now I could move it up or down or to the sides. I could size it, but with freestanding lace, I would leave it at the default side because it's not going to have any fabric between it. You don't want to increase it because it may just all fall apart. Remember, your design is digitized for that specific size, so it has the exact number of stitches, and you don't want gaps in your stitches or your stitches to be over top one and another. So I'm going to do Edit N because there's nothing else I need to do. And I'm going to hit Embroidery. So let's take a look at our embroidery screen. So I have my 5x7 hoop in here. It tells me I cannot use this. I have my Q foot on. Now my total number of stitches is 11,895, and it's going to take me 34 minutes. I have slowed this machine down to the slowest it can go so we can get a good image of what's going on. If I increase the speed, obviously that's going to be less time. It tells me I'm only using one thread, so there's no thread changes. And it's recommending a beige. I always use that loosely. Sometimes I may want to do it in green, purple, but of course I need to have matching bobbin thread, especially when you're doing freestanding lace. The top must always match the bottom. This is for setting my auto cuts and my tension. So when you do a jump stitch, which is a new embroidery term, so it may do some stitching here, and then it'll move to do some stitching over here. Do you want the sewing machine or the embroidery machine to knot off, cut, jump over here, and secure and go? Or do you want just to carry your thread over? I find it good to always cut. So after it's finished stitching here, cut, and then go over here and start. And my tension is here as well. I'm just going to leave everything there. This plus minus, I'll show you when we get to our next exercise, but just for a quick one. This will actually allow us to go behind stitches. So say I was on the 100th stitch, I could hit -1, go to 99, or I could jump ahead. So I can jump ahead in ones, hundreds, or thousands. Now this is really good to use if you're doing multiple thread changes and you may need to go back over the previous stitch you did. So once I do the applique one, you'll see it when we have different steps in our embroidery. Okay, so I've got my aqua mesh hooped here. We're ready to go. Now I did mention that everything is better with topping. So I have a piece here of H2O, and it's going to go in the middle. Now, never have your hands in the middle of an embroidery machine. You may find the needle go through your fingernail, really hurt yourself, and never use pins. The best thing to do is to use some tearaway embroidery tape by OESD or Kimberbell. And then what you do is you just tape it down, because what you don't want is this moving around while you're stitching. And I usually put one in each, the top corner and the side corner. If you feel like you need to put it in all four corners, go right ahead. We are ready to go. So this is red light. So if this button is red, it means it's not in the correct format to stitch. So if I hit the button, the menu over here is going to say what the issue is. In this case, my presser foot is still up. So you need to acknowledge this message by hitting OK, then lower the presser foot, and the button turns green. That means it's ready to embroider. I tend to leave my top thread long. Some people will cut this really short, but what can happen is that when you start to embroider, it will become unthreaded. So this we can easily trim once we get embroidering. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and hit the green button, and it's going to go. So it's securing the stitch. I can go ahead and stop it at this point now. Now I'm going to cut my top thread. So it starts off slow and then it goes faster. You'll notice that it's actually stitching the underlay stitches that I talked about before. It needs to have the foundation in which all the embroidery stitches are going to sit on. So I'm going to speed up my machine. So I'm just going to pause the stitching right there. So here's a really good example of all your underlay stitches. Because this is not having any fabric with it, it's just going to be made out of thread. So underlay stitches are super important on a freestanding lace. If you take a look at the menu over here, you'll notice that now it's only at 20 minutes because I sped up the machine. I'm going to make it go a little bit faster than that. So I'm going to arrow through maximum embroidery speed, and I believe 650 is the fastest this machine will go. Then I'll hit OK. Now I'm going to resume my stitching. And the screen has now shown 19 minutes. So my machine has stopped embroidering, and on my menu over here it says check and rethread the upper thread, and I've just noticed that my thread has broken, which unfortunately does happen. So let's fix the issue and restart our embroidery. The light is red, so it's telling me that it's not ready to embroider. I'm going to take my hoop off and just push the snap, push it in. Put the foot up first, always helps. And then take the hoop out carefully. So I suspect my bobbin thread is, I have a bit of a mess in the back here because it was stitching for a bit without a top thread. So I'm going to use my scissors and cut the mess off. Okay, so let's just clean everything up here, right? So there's my bobbin thread. And always check your bobbin, how much you have in it when you go to starting with freestanding lace. Let's rethread my machine. So of course I have the isocord thread in here. I want to just talk about these little thread caps. They come in your accessory bag. And these are used for any spool that has that type of hole in it. And what it does, it prevents this from bumping, rolling around, so you don't get broken stitches, you don't get broken needles, and it's really important to use this, I would say, all the time on your embroidery machine. And if you're sewing and you're using this type of spool, you want to use that one as well. Don't use the one that has the big cap in. It looks like one of those discs you'd put into a 45 record, because what will happen is that your thread will catch on that little disc. This is the proper one to use. I would strongly suggest you buy some more of them and always keep them handy. They're quite easy to lose. So I'm going to go rethread my machine. So I've got that rethreaded. So now what I need to do is put my hoop back on, and I need to back up some stitches. So let's do that next. I'm going to slide my embroidery hoop back on, line it up, snap it in. Okay. So now on my menu, I need to clear this message by hitting OK. Now you're going to go into the plus and minus. Now what I don't know is that if my thread broke 10 stitches ago, 11 or 12. My rule of thumb is I tend to go back 10. So you'll see I'm at 3,956. If I hit a minus 10, it goes 3,946. And in this case, because I am doing freestanding lace, so I'm only going to have the thread, I would go back another 10 to 36. It's okay if I stitch over top my previous, it just makes it stronger. Now I hit OK. And now I just put my foot down and you'll see my light will go green. So let's go ahead and start. And we'll go for a bit. And I'm going to trim that top thread. You don't want it to get caught under the foot. And I continue on. So my embroidery is now finished. You'll notice on the menu screen, it says that finished embroidery. My button is green and I'm ready to go. So let's go ahead and cut my thread so I can actually use the thread cutter up on the machine here. Now I'm ready to take my freestanding lace out. So I lift my foot, immediately it turns red, so it's not ready for embroidery. Let's take the hoop out. So here I have a bowl of warm water and my hoop, so I'm just going to loosen my hoop. Put your hoop aside, and now I have my freestanding lace. And take off your tape. Now we're just going to do a rough cut around your freestanding lace, because it's actually going to dissolve, so I don't need to cut it out perfectly. And you can save these little bits. Now I'm using my double angle scissors, and I have the angle pointed out so I don't inadvertently cut into my freestanding lace. So I call this a rough cut. I'm just rough cutting around the lace. Now I used an aqua mesh on the bottom, which means it's water soluble, and I use stitch H2 on top, which is a topping, and it's water soluble. So I can just put my little spare pieces aside. Just trim this long bobbin thread. You clean it up on the back if you want. Let's bring my warm water over here. Now what I'm going to do is dip it into the water. I'm actually going to soak it into the water, and it's going to dissolve the stabilizer. And that's why you use a water-soluble stabilizer. You can see that it's disappeared all around the edges. And that's what's supposed to do it. It makes it a bit, I'm going to call it slimy, but it's actually starch. So you can determine how much to take off by subsequently dunking it in the warm water. You just keep removing more and more starch. So where it's in here, there's no stabilizer left. It's all gone. There's no stabilizer in this little flower. There we go. That feels, and you decide on how much starch you want in here. So I'll move this to the side and just have a towel. And yeah, I just have a paper towel here, and I'm just going to squeeze the excess water out. And then you let it dry. Yeah. You've made your first piece of freestanding lace.